So welcome back everybody to the Rugby Magazine Fantasy Show. Now I promise you a little bit of meat on the bone, and in this one we're looking at predictions and top picks from each nation in Pool A of the Rugby World Cup. So, Pool A of the Rugby World Cup. Now, each group in this competition has its own stories, and this one is no different. Can Scotland topple Ireland and finish top of the group? Can Japan topple Scotland and make it through to the quarterfinals? Are we set for a fairy tale win from Russia somewhere in the competition? Now, it seems only fitting that we start the show by looking at the number one ranked team in the world, even though we know that means absolutely nothing. That said, Ireland have beaten New Zealand twice in their last three meetings, and despite a poor 2019 by their standards, they head into the competition looking like pool winners. Historically, they are perennial quarter-finalists, and with New Zealand or South Africa on the horizon for them in the quarterfinals in this iteration, they're going to have to be at their very best to break new ground. And in terms of predicted results, our algorithm has Ireland beating Scotland by 31 points to 23, which will of course put them at the top of the group. Incidentally, we have New Zealand beating South Africa too, which means it's looking likely to be an Ireland-South Africa quarter-final. Now, victory in their final warm-up game against Wales gave Ireland that number one spot in the world rankings, but as I said, 2019 hasn't otherwise been kind to them. 6 wins out of 9 this year. 2 defeats to England, and that loss to Wales at the end of Six Nations does seem to be behind them, and they look to be heading into the World Cup in some good form. Amongst that, there have been some diligent and consistent performances from plenty of their players. Dave Kilcoyne is playing really well, as is Johnny Sexton, but neither of those make my top 3 picks for Ireland. The number 1 pick I have for Ireland is James Ryan. He is an understated and, dare I say it, world-class performer in the engine room for Ireland, and he looks set to make some really good points. He averaged 33 points a game through the Six Nations, and he matched that in the warm-up game against Wales too, and I expect that to continue through the World Cup. My second pick is Conor Murray. Now, given that 63% of the fantasy base has also picked him, it looks like he's a popular choice. Now, he's back to his imperious best through the warm-up fixtures, and if he can match his performance in the Six Nations, 63% of you are going to be happy, and roughly 100% of Ireland. My final pick goes to the rock upon which Ireland is built, Tadhg Furlong. He had an absolutely stupendous performance against Australia back in the Autumn Internationals, and 2019 has perhaps been muted by his standards, but I expect him to absolutely rip it up through the World Cup. I'm also going to throw in a wildcard option for each team, and for Ireland, that's Jack Conan. Now, he carries really well, he's always alive, he's always looking to stay in the game, and from a fantasy point of view, that's going to generate an awful lot of points. If he can start in that number 8 berth for Ireland, then you are looking at a cracking player for the World Cup. Now, Ireland don't have their bye until round 4 of the competition, so front load them and get them into your squad as you head into the World Cup. Next up then is Scotland, and they are also perennial quarter-finalists in the World Cup. Chances are that's where they're going to head at this time too. But you know what? They have got an absolutely electric backline. Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg are obviously the standout players. Adam Hastings is waiting there in the wings. All they could do with is a little bit more grunt up front and a little bit more consistency. When they win, they're incredible. But then they fail to turn up the week after. And then after that they win again. Now, this was all consolidated into one fixture at the end of the Six Nations when they played against England, and they came from, 31-0 down to be 31-8 up, and it was just a George Ford try and conversion that kept them from probably one of the most famous victories ever. Now, as predictions go, as I said, they're going to lose to Ireland, and that'll probably give them the runner-up berth in the group and a fixture against New Zealand in the quarterfinals. But their last group game is against Japan, and even though our algorithm is predicting a 25-16 win for them, that could potentially be a little bit of a banana skin. Now, while the warm-up games aren't always necessarily the most accurate representation of where a team is at heading into a competition, the Scotland players have been giving some really good accounts of themselves heading into the World Cup. Alan Dell looked sharp against Georgia, and he's an exciting option in the front row, especially after his Six Nations form. And looking back at the Six Nations, Grant Gilchrist also had a really good tournament. But neither of those make my top 3 picks. It perhaps comes as no surprise that my top pick is Finn Russell, who heads into the World Cup as one of the key players for Scotland. Strong performances in the Six Nations, not least that epic game against England, and good performances against France and Georgia in the warm-up games make him a no-brainer as the first choice pick. My second pick for Scotland goes to Greg Laidlaw, who very rarely slips below the 30-point mark and also offers another good kicking option in your squad. He's actually also got one of the best defensive records for a 9, and certainly through the Six Nations, and so he actually makes a really great, well-rounded individual for your team. My third pick for Scotland goes to a player who absolutely beasted it through the Six Nations this year, and that's Stuart McInally. He's another player who generally hits 30 points per game, but perhaps more magnificently, he does it in 60 minutes rather than 80. If there was a slight concern, it's perhaps his discipline, but that's a small price to pay for one of Scotland's finest. For Scotland's wildcard option, I'm going to go with Darcy Graham. Amazing footwork, superb finisher, and if he can hold on to that wing spot in the team, then he will absolutely rip it up like he did against England and Wales in the Six Nations. Now, Scotland's bye is round 2, and given that they start the competition against Ireland, it might be best holding on to these guys and bringing them into your squad for round 3, 4 and 5 of the group stages. So next up is Japan, and they haven't really had a bad run through the last 12 months. Their defeat against New Zealand in the first Autumn International last year was put firmly behind them when they went to Twickenham, and they absolutely put England to the test. Michael Leitch putting in an absolutely magnificent performance in that game. From there, they've won against fellow Pool A team Russia, and they've also beaten Tonga, Fiji and the USA. They arrive in the competition having lost to South Africa by 41 points to 7, but given that South Africa had a real wrong to right in that fixture, it's no wonder we'll perhaps let them off with that one. As hosts this time round though, there's likely to be an increased level of performance playing in front of your home crowd, and I'm sure everybody out there wants Japan to make it to the quarterfinals so as that England remain the only hosts to go out in the group stage. Now, Japan kick off the tournament as a whole, and our algorithm has given them a victory in that fixture. I think many would agree that they'd be hard-pressed to beat Ireland, but if they can beat Scotland and take that runner-up spot in the group and make it to the quarterfinals, that's got to be considered a major victory for the hosts. Now, it's hard to look beyond talismanic leader Michael Leitch as the top pick for Japan. His 48-point haul caused England a major headache back in November, and if he can take that into the World Cup, then you're looking at an absolutely fantastic fantasy player. And my second pick for Japan has to go to Amanaki Mafi. Now, this guy absolutely ripped it up with the Rebels back in 2018 and performed really admirably in his Sunwolf fixtures through 2019. But he's a superb player who carries really, really well and is generally a points machine. He's certainly somebody that you should be considering for your squad, if not a starting berth. And finally, for my third pick for Japan, Utamura. Now, this is a guy with loads of experience who fits in really nicely into the Japanese backline. Now, his standout performance was against New Zealand last year, but he generally averages about 20 points a fixture, and if he can keep that going through the World Cup, then again, he's a really valuable player. And finally, as my wildcard, I've decided to go with Kazuki Himeno. He's a good all-round player, he carries well, he defends well, and he turns over the ball really well, and in time will probably fill Michael Leitch's shoes. Now, Japan's bye week is in round 3. Now, that's kind of awkwardly placed, and given that their first and last fixtures are probably their most difficult, it might make a difference to the way that their points are scored, but given they're in front of a home crowd, that could be enough of a boost not to see too much of a drop. So next up is Samoa, and they come into the competition having beaten Germany in a playoff after finishing bottom of the Pacific Nations Cup. Now, in terms of their World Cup pedigree, they made the quarterfinals in 91 and 95, but they've failed to progress beyond the group stages since. Will they do it this time? Perhaps, but they're hampered by consistency and perhaps some leadership, but they've blooded a lot of young guys who look set to have a really exciting tournament. Now, they've got their bye for round 1, so perhaps don't spend too much time on them for your opening squad and keep some of these players in mind for the later few rounds of the group stages. From there though, they kick off their tournament against Russia, and funnily enough, our algorithm is kicking out a Russia win for that, so that bottom of the table clash is going to be really, really interesting. And after that, they've got Japan, Scotland and Ireland, and even with the most spirited performances, they're probably looking down the barrel of defeat. There are some standout players for the Samoans though. Chris Vui, Ed Fido and Rookie of the Year, Johnny Vaili. But my top pick for the Samoans is Afomosa, who had a really good game against Australia in the warm-ups. And second is Kane Lauapepe, who looks set for a really good tournament. My final pick is someone who's going to give you an awful lot of versatility in your back three and centre, Tim Nano Williams. And then finally, my wild card for Samoa is Melani Mataveo. Now, he's not long returned from a serious injury, but the 23-year-old scrum half looks set for a really bright campaign for Samoa and offers a great option at 9 on your squad. And finally, we come to Russia. Now, Russia's last appearance was in 2011 down in New Zealand, and they've only made it to this iteration because Romania and Spain, who finished ahead of them in the Rugby Europe Championship, were docked points for fielding ineligible players. They lost all 4 games they played last time out, and barring a shock victory against Samoa, chances are they're going to do the same again this time round. But they've beaten Namibia twice in the last year, and they've pushed Uruguay and Japan really close. That said though, a heavy defeat against Italy and a humbling against Jersey Reds no less has certainly put the cat amongst the pigeons. Now, they've got their bye in round 5 of the competition, so if you want to, front load their players as you head in to the tournament. Now, as I said, our algorithm is pulling out a victory for the Russians against Samoa, and wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But in all likelihood, they'll lose all of their games and they'll find themselves at the bottom of their group. They do have a few players who could be worth the space in your squad though. Now, my first pick for Russia is Stanislav Selski, who is a great defensive hooker and great at the line-out. And following him is number 8 Viktor Gresev, and his experience is something that Russia are going to sorely need. And my final pick, and another player with loads of experience, is Vasily Artemyev, who incidentally was schooled in Ireland and is an Ireland under-19 international. And then last but not least, my wildcard option for Russia goes to their abrasive flanker Tagir Gatchev. And if he can keep his tackle count up, then there are plenty of points on offer with him. So there we go, Pool A of the Rugby World Cup. Now, Ireland against Scotland is obviously the big fixture in this one, and our prediction algorithm has given Ireland a 31-23 victory that will see them top the group. So, as ever, hit that like and subscribe button, follow us on your favourite social media channel, and look out for the next episode where we're going to be taking a look at, you guessed it, Pool B of the Rugby World Cup.